Tonight, you're drifting into 1920s New York, where jazz hums through alleyways, streetlights glow like tired stars, and even the city's dreams wear silk gloves. The first thing you notice is the light. Not the sunlight, you left that behind hours ago, but the artificial glow that clings to the city after dark, like it refuses to go home. Street lamps stretch down avenues in long, honey-colored lines, turning wet pavement into mirrors. You step onto the sidewalk and feel the city breathe around you, steam rising from underground grates, the low murmur of voices, the distant clang of a streetcar bell, somewhere far off, like a sleepy cowbell for a million insomniacs. You are here. In New York. In the 1920s. At night. You probably won't make it through this night. And that's perfectly fine. Before we begin, a small, gentle whisper from the shadows: if you like drifting through history like this, go ahead and like and subscribe. It helps this channel keep the lamps lit. And while you're here, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Somewhere, some other listener is probably yawning in the same hour, and that feels comforting. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. You stand on a street corner in Midtown Manhattan, though stand might be generous. Your posture is more like a polite lean, the kind you adopt when you're not in a hurry and also not entirely sure where you're going. The pavement under your shoes is slightly slick from a recent rain, and the air smells like wet stone, coal smoke, and something vaguely sweet drifting from a nearby bakery that refuses to sleep as much as you do. Above you, buildings rise like stone cliffs, their windows glowing in warm rectangles. Some are dark. Some flicker with movement, shadows passing, lamps being turned on, radios humming softly behind curtains. It's like the city is a giant apartment building, and you're wandering the hallway at midnight, trying not to wake anyone while secretly wanting to know everyone's business. A car passes, its headlights sweeping over you like a lighthouse beam. Not the sleek, silent cars you're used to, but boxy, proud machines that rumble and growl and occasionally backfire like they're coughing politely before speaking. The tires hiss on the wet street. Somewhere, a horn honks, not angrily, just conversationally. The 1920s city does not whisper. It murmurs. You start walking. Your shoes click against the pavement in a steady rhythm, and you quickly realize that in this city, you are never walking alone, even when you're physically alone. There are footsteps ahead of you, behind you, to your left and right. The city is a symphony of movement, heels tapping, boots scuffing, delivery carts rattling, newspapers slapping against thighs, keys jingling, coins clinking, laughter bubbling up from somewhere just out of sight. A woman passes you, her coat trimmed with fur, her cloche hat pulled low, her perfume lingering in the air for a moment longer than necessary, like a memory that doesn't want to let go. A man follows her, hands in his pockets, humming something that might be a tune or might just be the sound of someone trying to stay awake on his way home. You glance into a shop window. It's dark now, but inside you can still see the shapes of hats, gloves, shoes, mannequins frozen mid-stride, as if they were walking somewhere before being interrupted by night. A reflection stares back at you, not quite the city, just a moving shape in glass and shadow. This is the major historical fact drifting quietly through your walk. By the 1920s, New York City had become the largest city in the world, with a population exceeding 5 million people, making it a global center of culture, commerce, and nightlife. 5 million lives, stacked vertically, breathing sideways, sharing walls, ceilings, and sometimes secrets. That's a lot of snores, sighs, arguments, love letters, and half-finished cups of coffee. You continue walking, and the street subtly changes texture beneath your feet. The shops become offices. The offices become theaters. The theaters become restaurants. And somewhere in between, music begins to leak into the street. At first, it's just a suggestion, a faint trumpet, a low piano chord, a brush against a snare drum, like someone testing the water before diving in. Then it grows clearer. Louder. Warmer. The sound of jazz spills out of a doorway like light escaping under a closed door. You pause. There's a small sign above the entrance. Nothing flashy. Just a few letters painted in gold, already flaking at the edges. Inside, you can see dim lights, a haze of smoke, and silhouettes moving in gentle, rhythmic shapes. You step inside. The door closes behind you with a soft thud, and suddenly the outside world feels far away, like you've stepped through a curtain into another version of reality, one where the air is thicker, warmer, and vibrates with music. A trumpet sings, not loudly, not aggressively, but like it's telling a story you already half remember. A piano answers, its notes rolling across the room like marbles on wood. A bass hums beneath it all, steady and reassuring, like a heartbeat you don't have to think about. The room is small, low-ceilinged, and crowded, but somehow it doesn't feel cramped. It feels intimate. Tables are pushed close together. Candles flicker in small glass holders, casting shadows that dance on the walls. Smoke curls lazily toward the ceiling, as if it, too, is enjoying the music. You slide into an empty chair near the back. No one seems to notice you arrive, which feels like a gift. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to perform. You can just exist here, quietly, soaking in the sound. A server passes by, balancing a tray of drinks with the casual confidence of someone who has done this 1,000 times and is too tired to be impressed by gravity anymore. He sets a glass in front of you. You didn't order it, but you also don't question it. In the 1920s, things just happen. Especially at night. You lift the glass. It smells sharp, sweet, and faintly dangerous. Prohibition is technically in effect, which means alcohol is illegal, which means, naturally, it is everywhere. This brings us to an obscure cultural tidbit. During Prohibition, 1920 to 1933, New York City reportedly had more speakeasies than legal bars before the ban, with estimates ranging from 30,000 to over 100,000 hidden drinking establishments. Historians still debate the exact number, mostly because counting illegal bars is not a task known for its accuracy. You take a sip. It burns a little, then warms, then settles somewhere behind your eyes, like a tiny lamp being turned on in your skull. You feel slightly lighter. Slightly slower. Slightly more willing to forgive the world for being loud. On the small stage, the band plays on. The trumpet player leans into his instrument, eyes half closed, cheeks puffing gently, as if he's blowing warmth into the room. The pianist's fingers move quickly but calmly, like they're doing something very important but also very familiar, like tying shoelaces in the dark. People sway in their seats. Some tap their fingers on the table. Some close their eyes. Some stare into their drinks as if expecting the future to appear at the bottom of the glass. A couple near the front holds hands. Their fingers are intertwined, resting on the table between them. They are not talking. They do not need to. Their silence feels louder than most conversations. You notice a man at the bar, his hat tipped forward, his face mostly hidden. He has the posture of someone who is listening very carefully, not just to the music, but to something inside himself. Perhaps he's waiting for courage. Perhaps he's waiting for forgetfulness. Perhaps he's just waiting for the next song. This is one of those moments where you realize the city is not just a place. It's a collection of people having very private experiences in very public spaces. You finish your drink slowly. Not because you're trying to be responsible, this is the 1920s, and responsibility left the building somewhere around the second trumpet solo, but because there's no rush. The music will continue whether you hurry or not. The night will unfold at its own pace. Eventually, you stand. No one stops you. No one asks where you're going. No one seems surprised that you were ever there at all. This is another feature of New York: you can arrive silently, and you can leave silently, and the city will absorb both without comment. You step back out onto the street. The night feels cooler now, as if it's taken a breath while you were inside. The street lamps glow more softly, their light diffused by a thin mist rising from the pavement. The city smells different here: less smoke, more rain, more metal, more of that indefinable scent that only large cities have, which is somehow both unpleasant and comforting at the same time. You walk again. This time, you wander toward a neighborhood that feels quieter, though quiet in New York is a relative term, like small, or peaceful, or low noise pollution. It means fewer horns, fewer voices, fewer people, but never none. Brownstones line the street, their stoops leading up to heavy wooden doors. Some windows glow faintly. Some are dark. Some flicker with the pale blue light of a radio dial. You hear voices behind walls, muffled conversations, laughter, the clink of dishes, the sound of someone arguing softly about something that feels very important to them and completely irrelevant to you, which is, in its own way, beautiful. You pass a small grocery store that is somehow still open. The owner sits behind the counter, reading a newspaper under a single bulb. He glances up as you pass, nods slightly, then returns to his reading, as if he has just acknowledged the existence of a passing cloud. A cat darts across the street in front of you, pauses briefly under a street lamp, then disappears into the shadows. It looks at you for half a second, its eyes glowing faintly, then decides you are not worth its time, which is probably fair. You continue walking, your steps slowing, your thoughts drifting. You think about the people you saw in the jazz club. The woman with the fur-trimmed coat. The man at the bar. The couple holding hands. You realize that none of them knew your name, and you didn't know theirs, and yet you shared a moment. A few minutes of music. A few breaths of the same smoky air. A few heartbeats aligned to the same rhythm. This is the part of history that never makes it into textbooks. You turn a corner, and the street opens up into a small park. Not one of the grand parks with fountains and statues and tourists, but a modest square with a few benches, some trees, and a patch of grass that looks tired but determined. A street lamp stands at one end, casting a pool of light onto a bench beneath it. You sit. The bench is cool and slightly damp. The wood is worn smooth by years of bodies passing through, resting, waiting, thinking, maybe crying quietly, maybe laughing, maybe just existing between one place and another. You lean back and look up. The sky above New York is not particularly starry. The city's lights wash out most of the constellations. But you can see a few faint points of light, stubbornly shining through the haze, like they're trying to remind you that the universe still exists, even if it has been temporarily overshadowed by brick, steel, and electric bulbs. You breathe in. The air is cool. It smells like leaves, rain, smoke, and something vaguely metallic. It smells like a city that has been awake for a very long time and is not quite ready to sleep. Your thoughts drift again, slower now, softer around the edges. You think about how the 1920s are often remembered as loud, wild, reckless, flappers, speakeasies, jazz, excess. And yes, that is part of the story. But there is also this quieter side, the people sitting alone on benches, the shopkeepers reading newspapers at midnight, the couples whispering behind closed doors, the musicians playing not for fame but for the simple pleasure of sound. Historians still debate whether the jazz age was truly as carefree as popular culture suggests, or whether it was, in part, a response to the trauma of World War I, a collective attempt to dance away grief, loss, and uncertainty. You consider this as you sit under the street lamp, watching the mist drift through the light like slow-moving ghosts that forgot what they were haunting. A car passes, its headlights briefly illuminating the park, then disappearing down the street. Somewhere, a train rumbles underground, a deep, distant sound that you feel more than hear, like the city's heartbeat echoing through your bones. You realize you are tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from doing too much, but the kind that comes from doing enough. Enough walking. Enough listening. Enough being present in a place that asks nothing of you except that you exist. You stand slowly, your joints protesting gently, as if to say, we were comfortable here, but fine, let's go. You step off the bench and return to the sidewalk. You walk again, but this time your steps are slower, your gaze softer, your thoughts more diffuse. You are not looking for anything in particular. You are simply moving through space, through time, through a city that does not mind if you do not have a destination. You pass another jazz club. This one is louder. The music spills out onto the street in energetic bursts, brass, drums, laughter, applause. A group of people stands outside, smoking, talking, gesturing animatedly, as if they are trying to explain the concept of joy to each other in increasingly elaborate ways. You smile faintly and continue walking. A few blocks later, you pass a movie theater. A marquee glows above the entrance, letters spelling out the title of a silent film. A small crowd stands near the ticket booth, chatting, laughing, adjusting their coats. You imagine them sitting in the dark, watching flickering images on a screen, reading words projected onto the film, filling in the voices in their own heads. This, too, is a major historical fact drifting through the night. By the 1920s, silent films had become one of the most popular forms of entertainment in New York, with grand movie palaces attracting thousands of viewers each night. People came not just to watch movies, but to experience something together, in a shared darkness, guided by light and music. You imagine sitting in one of those velvet seats, the orchestra playing, the screen glowing, the audience breathing in unison, reacting together, laughing together, holding their breath together. It feels similar to the jazz club, and yet different, another way of sharing time, another way of escaping, another way of feeling less alone in a city of millions. You continue walking. The streets gradually grow quieter. The buildings become shorter. The lights become fewer. The city begins to soften, like a person who has finally admitted they are tired but is still refusing to go to bed. You find yourself in a residential neighborhood now. The houses are close together, their facades worn but sturdy. Laundry hangs from lines strung between buildings, swaying gently in the night breeze, like flags of everyday life. You pass a window where a radio is playing softly. You can't make out the words, but the melody drifts into the street, wrapping around you like a thin blanket. It's comforting. Familiar. Even if you've never heard this song before, it feels like something you've always known. You stop for a moment and listen. The radio voice fades. The music continues. The night hums around you. You realize something quietly, without drama: the city is not trying to impress you. It is not performing. It is simply being itself, and you happen to be here to witness it. This is where the night begins to slow. Not abruptly. Not all at once. Just gently, like a clock whose ticking becomes less urgent, more like breathing. You turn another corner and find yourself back on a familiar street. You recognize the bakery from earlier. The windows are dark now. The sweet smell has faded, replaced by the neutral scent of cooling stone and quiet ovens. Remember the street you walked past earlier? It's back. And somehow, it feels different now. Not because it has changed, but because you have. You walk past the same shop windows, the same brownstones, the same street lamps. But your steps are slower. Your thoughts are quieter. Your attention is softer. You feel like the city has stopped asking you to move and has started inviting you to rest. You pause again, this time near a stoop. You sit down on the steps, your back against the railing, your feet on the sidewalk. The metal is cool against your spine. The stone beneath you is solid, reassuring, unmoving. You look up. The street lamp above you hums softly. Not loudly. Just enough to remind you it's there. The light spills onto the sidewalk, creating a small island of warmth in a sea of shadow. You sit within it, feeling oddly safe, as if the lamp has decided, for this moment, to watch over you. You breathe. Slowly. In. Out. You think about how many people have sat on these same steps before you. How many conversations have happened here? How many goodbyes? How many reunions? How many silent moments of exhaustion, relief, heartbreak, joy? The city holds all of it. You realize that you are no longer thinking about where you are going. You are simply here. And that feels enough. This is the end of the first part of the night, though the night itself is far from over. You are just beginning to understand its rhythm, its softness beneath the noise, its quiet persistence beneath the spectacle. The jazz will keep playing somewhere. The streetlights will keep glowing. The radios will keep humming. The trains will keep rumbling. The people will keep dreaming, whether they are asleep or awake. And you, for now, are allowed to rest. You don't know how long you've been sitting there. Time in the city at night is strange. It stretches. It folds. It loops back on itself like a song you didn't realize was on repeat. You might have been there for minutes. You might have been there for hours. The street lamp above you hums steadily, indifferent to your uncertainty, as if to say, time is my problem, not yours. You stand slowly, feeling the faint stiffness in your legs, the gentle reminder that you are, in fact, a physical being with joints and gravity and all that charming nonsense. You step back onto the sidewalk, your shoes making a soft sound that feels louder than it actually is, like when you accidentally cough in a library and feel personally responsible for ruining literature. The night has deepened. The sky is darker now, the haze thicker, the air cooler. The city has not gone to sleep, but it has changed posture, from upright and alert to slouched and drowsy, like someone who insists they're fine while slowly nodding off mid-sentence. You walk again, this time with less intention and more curiosity. The streets are quieter, but not empty. A few people still pass you, late workers, night owls, lovers, wanderers, insomniacs, people who are both too tired to go home and too restless to stay still. You pass a man sweeping the sidewalk outside a closed storefront. His broom moves in slow, rhythmic arcs, brushing dust and debris into small, neat piles that he then gathers and removes. He works methodically, without hurry, without complaint, without apparent audience. He glances up as you pass, nods once, then returns to his sweeping, as if this small exchange has completed an invisible contract between the two of you. Yes, we are both here. Yes, we acknowledge this. Now we continue. This, too, is a piece of history. By the 1920s, New York City employed thousands of sanitation workers who worked overnight to clean the streets, ensuring the city was ready for the next day before most residents woke up. It's not glamorous work. It doesn't make headlines. It doesn't inspire novels or jazz songs. But without it, the city would choke on its own leftovers, buried beneath yesterday's news and today's carelessness. You walk past a closed newspaper stand. The front pages are still visible behind the glass, headlines frozen in time, announcing events that already feel like yesterday's problems. You try to read one, but the light is too dim, and the words blur together. It doesn't matter. Tomorrow, there will be new headlines, new worries, new reasons to pretend the world is either falling apart or finally getting its act together. You continue walking. You hear laughter echoing from a nearby alley. Not loud laughter, not drunken laughter, just a few people sharing something quietly funny, the kind of laughter that doesn't need to be heard by anyone else to be real. You catch a glimpse of them as you pass the alley entrance, a small group standing close together, coats pulled tight, faces lit by the glow of a cigarette. They pause when they see you, then resume their conversation, as if your presence was a brief ripple in a pond that quickly smoothed itself out. You keep moving. The city feels different now. Less performative. Less concerned with impressing you. It's no longer showing you its brightest lights or loudest sounds. Instead, it's offering you its softer edges, quiet streets, dim windows, slow footsteps, low voices, tired eyes, relaxed shoulders. You reach another intersection and pause. The traffic light glows red, then green, then red again, obediently cycling through its duties even though no cars are coming. You stand there, watching it change, feeling oddly comforted by its consistency. Some things in the world will continue doing their job whether or not anyone is watching, and there is something deeply reassuring about that. You cross the street. On the other side, you find a small diner that is still open. The neon sign in the window flickers slightly, one letter dimmer than the others, giving the word diner a subtle, accidental personality. Inside, you can see a few people sitting at the counter, their silhouettes framed by the glow of overhead lights. You hesitate, then push the door open. A bell above the door rings softly, announcing your arrival to no one in particular. The air inside is warm and smells like coffee, grease, and something sweet baking in the back. The diner is small, with a long counter, a few booths, and a waitress wiping down a table with slow, practiced motions. You take a seat at the counter. A man sits a few stools away, stirring his coffee with the kind of focus usually reserved for defusing bombs. A woman sits at the far end, eating a slice of pie, her fork moving slowly, as if she is in no hurry to finish or leave. The waitress glances at you, nods, then continues her task, as if to say, "I see you. I will get to you." There is no rush. You rest your elbows on the counter, your chin in your hands, and simply exist. Eventually, a cup of coffee appears in front of you. You didn't order it, but you also don't question it. This seems to be a recurring theme tonight. Things appear when you need them, and you accept them without fuss, like a cat accepting a sunny spot on the floor. You take a sip. It's hot, bitter, and comforting. It tastes like staying awake. It tastes like someone refusing to give in just yet. It tastes like the promise of morning, even though morning feels very far away. You glance around the diner. The man with the coffee looks tired, but not unhappy. The woman with the pie looks content, but not excited. The waitress looks bored, but not annoyed. Everyone here seems to exist in a middle state, not particularly joyful, not particularly miserable, just present. This is the obscure cultural tidbit drifting into the booth. In the 1920s, diners became popular as affordable, round-the-clock eating establishments, often converted from old railroad dining cars, offering late-night meals to workers, travelers, and insomniacs. Historians still debate whether diners were truly democratic spaces or simply reflected existing social divides in a more casual setting. You finish your coffee slowly. You don't feel rushed. No one is watching the clock. No one is telling you to leave. The diner exists outside of urgency, suspended in a warm bubble of caffeine, grease, and quiet companionship. Eventually, you stand. The bell rings again as you leave, its sound lingering for a moment in the air, like the echo of a polite goodbye. Outside, the night feels cooler, sharper, more awake than the diner, as if the warmth inside had briefly insulated you from the city's edges. You walk again. The streets are now nearly empty. The few people you see are walking alone, their footsteps echoing softly, their faces calm, their movements unhurried. You pass a man leaning against a lamppost, smoking quietly, staring at nothing in particular. You pass a woman walking her dog, the leash slack, the dog trotting contentedly, sniffing the ground as if it is conducting a very important investigation into the history of smells. You pass a group of 3 men carrying instruments, one with a trumpet case, one with a violin, one with a small drum. They walk together, talking softly, their voices low and tired but still warm, like embers that haven't quite gone out. You wonder where they've been playing. You wonder where they're going now. You don't ask. Some questions are better left unanswered, not because the answers are unimportant, but because the not knowing leaves space for imagination, and imagination is sometimes more soothing than certainty. You reach a river. The water is dark, reflecting the lights of the city in long, trembling lines that stretch and break and reform with each small movement of the surface. Bridges span the river like quiet guardians, their arches glowing softly, their light steady and patient. You walk along the riverbank, the sound of water moving beside you, the distant hum of traffic above, the occasional splash of something unseen slipping into the water. You lean on a railing and look out across the river. On the other side, the city continues. More buildings. More lights. More lives. More stories unfolding quietly behind walls and windows. You think about how rivers have always been symbols of time, of movement, of change. You think about how this river has seen generations come and go, how it has reflected the faces of people who no longer exist, how it has carried secrets, debris, dreams, and probably at least one very confused hat. This brings us to another major historical fact, drifting gently across the water. The East River and Hudson River were central to New York's growth, serving as vital transportation routes for goods, immigrants, and industries throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries. Without these rivers, the city would not be the city. It would be something else entirely, smaller, quieter, less ambitious, less complicated, less alive. You stand there for a while, listening to the water, watching the lights, feeling the night settle around you like a blanket that is slightly too heavy but also very comforting. Your thoughts slow. Your breathing deepens. Your shoulders relax. You feel less like a visitor now and more like a temporary resident of the night. Eventually, you turn away from the river and continue walking. You find yourself back in a neighborhood of brownstones and small apartment buildings. Most of the windows are dark now. A few glow faintly, like watchful eyes that refuse to close. You pass a stoop where a man is sitting, his back against the railing, his head tilted back, his eyes closed. You can't tell if he's asleep or just resting. You decide it doesn't matter. He looks peaceful, and that feels like enough information. You walk past a building where someone is playing a piano softly. The music drifts out through an open window, slow and deliberate, each note placed carefully, like someone arranging stones in a garden. You pause to listen, then continue walking, carrying the melody with you like a souvenir you didn't pay for. You think about how many private moments are happening around you right now. How many people are lying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling? How many are falling asleep mid-sentence? How many are reading? How many are thinking about someone they miss? How many are thinking about nothing at all? You realize that you are not alone, even when you are alone. This is one of the city's quiet gifts. You walk a little longer, then a little slower, then slower still. Eventually, you reach another small park, similar to the one you visited earlier, though not exactly the same. This one has a few benches, a small patch of grass, and a tree that looks older than most of the surrounding buildings, as if it has been quietly watching the city grow up around it. You sit on a bench beneath the tree. The leaves rustle softly in the night breeze. The branches sway gently, casting moving shadows on the ground, like slow, underwater shapes drifting across a sandy floor. You lean back, close your eyes, and listen. The city hums. Not loudly. Not urgently. Just steadily. You hear a distant train. A passing car. A door closing somewhere. A laugh. A cough. A voice. A footstep. A radio. A breeze. A leaf falling. Your own breathing. You think about the beginning of the night, when the city felt louder, brighter, more demanding. You think about how it has slowly softened, how it has gradually shifted from spectacle to stillness, from performance to presence. Remember the jazz club from earlier? The trumpet, the piano, the smoke, the candles. Somewhere, that music is probably still playing. Somewhere, someone is still tapping their foot, still sipping a drink, still listening, still forgetting, still remembering. But here, now, under this tree, the night feels quieter. The city feels gentler. Time feels less insistent. You feel tired. Not exhausted. Not overwhelmed. Just, ready. Ready to let go of the day. Ready to stop moving. Ready to stop thinking. Ready to let the city carry itself for a while, without your help. You sit there, breathing slowly, feeling the bench beneath you, the cool air on your face, the steady presence of the tree behind you, the distant hum of the city around you. You realize that you are not waiting for anything anymore. You are simply resting. And that, in a city that never sleeps, feels like a small, quiet rebellion. The night continues. So do you. But now, you are moving inward rather than outward. The streets fade. The sounds soften. The lights dim. The city becomes a background murmur, like waves on a distant shore. You do not need to go anywhere else tonight. For now, it is enough to sit, to breathe, to exist, to be held by the quiet side of a loud place. And that is where we will pause, gently, before the next part of the night unfolds. You open your eyes, though you're not entirely sure when you close them. The bench beneath you is still there, solid and patient, as if it never considered leaving. The tree above you continues its slow, leafy whispering, the sound blending with the distant hum of the city. Nothing dramatic has changed. No sudden revelations. No cinematic shifts in lighting. Just the quiet, ongoing fact of being here. You stand slowly, stretching your arms above your head, your joints offering a gentle protest, like sleepy cats being asked to move from a warm spot. You roll your shoulders, take a deep breath, and step back onto the sidewalk. The night has thinned. Not disappeared, New York doesn't do that, but softened, like ink diluted with water. The darkness is lighter now, the edges less sharp, the air cooler and cleaner. You can feel the city preparing for morning, even though morning is still far away. It's like watching someone begin to tidy up a room long before guests arrive. You walk. This time, your steps feel different, not just slower, but lighter, as if the pavement has become slightly more forgiving, slightly more willing to carry your weight without complaint. You pass streets you don't recognize, then streets that feel vaguely familiar, then streets that feel like they've been waiting for you all along. You come upon a small bookstore. It's not open, of course, its windows are dark, its door locked, but the display window is still visible, and inside you can see shelves of books, their spines forming a quiet mosaic of colors and fonts. A handwritten sign in the window reads, "Open at 9. Please knock if you're a ghost." You smile faintly. This brings us to an obscure cultural tidbit drifting softly through the night air. Independent bookstores flourished in early 20th century New York, often serving as informal gathering spaces for writers, artists, and political thinkers long before coffee shops took on that role. Historians still debate how many literary movements were born not in universities, but in small, cluttered shops where people argued quietly about commas and the meaning of life. You linger in front of the window, scanning the spines, even though you can't read most of the titles from here. You imagine pulling one from the shelf, flipping through its pages, smelling the paper, feeling the weight of words in your hands. You imagine sitting in a chair somewhere, reading until the city wakes up around you. But for now, you keep walking. You turn down a narrower street, one lined with brick buildings that lean slightly toward each other, like old friends whispering secrets. The street is quiet enough that you can hear your own breathing, the soft scrape of your shoes, the distant echo of something moving somewhere far away. You pass a doorway where someone has left a light on. Through the window, you see a small kitchen, just a table, a chair, a sink, a kettle on the stove. The kettle isn't boiling, but it looks like it has recently, as if someone made tea or coffee and then forgot about it, or maybe just didn't care enough to turn off the light afterward. You wonder where they went. You wonder when they'll return. You wonder if they're okay. This is the strange intimacy of walking past other people's lives without participating in them. You see fragments. You feel echoes. You never get the whole story, but somehow the fragments are enough. You walk a little farther and come across a small church. Its doors are closed, its windows dark, but a single candle burns inside, visible through the glass, its flame steady and unwavering. The building is modest, not grand, not imposing, just a quiet structure sitting patiently on a quiet street, as if it has all the time in the world. You pause. This is your major historical fact for this part of the night. By the 1920s, New York City was home to thousands of religious institutions, reflecting the city's vast immigrant population and its diverse spiritual traditions. Catholic churches, synagogues, Protestant chapels, Eastern Orthodox sanctuaries, all existing within a few blocks of each other, sometimes even within the same building, like roommates who didn't choose each other but learned to coexist politely. You stand for a moment, looking at the candle, watching its flame flicker gently, like it's breathing. You don't feel compelled to go inside. You don't feel compelled to pray. You just feel calm. As if the candle is doing the work for you. You continue walking. The streets begin to slope downward, and you realize you're heading toward a waterfront neighborhood again. You hear the water before you see it, the soft lapping, the distant splash, the low, steady sound of movement that never quite stops. You reach the river and lean against the railing. The water looks different now than it did earlier. The reflections are softer, more diffuse. The lights shimmer less sharply, as if the river, too, is growing tired and is ready to rest. You look out across the water and think about the ships that pass through here, the cargo they carry, the people they transport, the stories they hold. You think about immigrants arriving in this city, stepping off boats with nothing but suitcases and hope and fear and determination, staring up at buildings that must have seemed impossibly tall, impossibly crowded, impossibly full of possibility. Historians still debate exactly what the average immigrant experience was like in early 20th century New York, but one thing is certain, it was rarely simple, and almost never easy. You imagine standing on a dock, clutching a bag, listening to a language you barely understand, trying to decide whether this new place will break you or build you, or, more likely, do a little of both. You turn away from the river and walk back into the city. The streets now feel like corridors rather than avenues, like hallways in a massive, slowly breathing building. You pass doorways, windows, stoops, fire escapes, all stacked vertically, all holding pieces of other people's lives. You walk past a building where someone is still awake, pacing behind a window. You can see their shadow moving back and forth, like a restless pendulum. You wonder what's keeping them up. Work? Worry? Love? Regret? The inability to fall asleep despite being very, very tired, an experience you may or may not be familiar with. You pass another window where someone is sleeping, their silhouette still, their breathing slow, their curtains slightly open, allowing a thin line of streetlight to fall across their bed. You feel a strange sense of gratitude for this accidental glimpse of vulnerability, even though they don't know you're there and never will. You walk on. Eventually, you reach a street where the buildings are taller again, the lights brighter, the sounds louder. You realize you've drifted back toward a more central part of the city, where even the night refuses to be entirely quiet. You pass a group of men standing outside a closed theater, talking softly, their voices low and tired, their gestures slow. One of them yawns so widely that it looks like he might swallow the streetlight behind him, which is impressive, but also a little concerning. You pass a woman walking briskly, her coat pulled tight, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement, her expression focused and distant, like she is late for something important or early for something unknown. You pass a newspaper truck parked on the side of the street, its back doors open, stacks of papers inside waiting to be delivered. A man inside the truck is sorting bundles, moving with quick, efficient motions, as if he has done this so many times that his body knows the routine better than his mind. This brings us to another major historical fact, gently unfolding under the streetlights. By the 1920s, newspapers were the primary source of information for most New Yorkers, with multiple daily editions delivered across the city before dawn. People would wake up to headlines, drink coffee, read about the world, and then step into their own small corner of it, carrying those stories with them like invisible luggage. You walk past the truck and imagine tomorrow's papers, headlines about politics, crime, entertainment, sports, scandals, tragedies, triumphs. You imagine people reading them at breakfast tables, in streetcars, in offices, on stoops, in parks, in diners. You imagine how those stories will shape their moods, their conversations, their fears, their hopes. You realize, quietly, that you are grateful to be walking through a moment before all of that. A moment when the news has not yet been delivered, when tomorrow has not yet been announced, when the city is still suspended between yesterday and today, between what was and what will be. You continue walking. Your steps slow again. Your thoughts drift again. Your breathing deepens again. You feel yourself sinking further into the night, not in a way that feels heavy or dark, but in a way that feels soft and enveloping, like being wrapped in a blanket that smells faintly of laundry soap and rain. You pass another small park, similar to the others you've seen tonight, though this one has a small fountain in the center. The fountain is off, but the basin holds a thin layer of water that reflects the streetlight above it, creating a small, shimmering pool of light in the darkness. You sit on the edge of the fountain. The stone is cool beneath you. The air is quiet around you. The city feels far away, even though you know it's only a few blocks in any direction. You lean back slightly, resting your hands behind you on the stone, and look up at the sky. You can see a few stars, faint but persistent. You can see the outlines of buildings against the darkness, their shapes softened by mist and distance. You can hear the distant hum of traffic, the occasional horn, the low murmur of voices somewhere far away. You feel peaceful. Not euphoric. Not ecstatic. Just peacefully, comfortably present. This is the part of the night where the city stops asking you to do anything at all. You sit there for a while. Long enough that your thoughts begin to slow even more. Long enough that your breathing becomes steady and deep. Long enough that your mind begins to drift, not toward specific memories or worries or plans, but toward a kind of gentle blankness, a mental horizon where thoughts fade into soft shapes and then disappear entirely. You realize, dimly, that this is what rest feels like. Not sleep. Not yet. But rest. The city continues around you, but it no longer demands your attention. It hums quietly in the background, like a distant ocean you can hear from your bed with the window slightly open. You think about the beginning of the night again, the jazz club, the diner, the river, the stoops, the street lamps. You think about how the city has slowly unfolded itself to you, layer by layer, sound by sound, light by light, until it now feels like a familiar place, even though you've only been here for a few hours. Remember the jazz melody from earlier? You can almost hear it now, faintly, drifting through your memory, blending with the sound of the city, becoming something softer, slower, more distant. You sit there until you feel ready to move again. And then, slowly, gently, you stand. You rise from the fountain's edge like someone waking from a nap they didn't realize they were taking. Your body feels heavier now, not unpleasantly, but comfortably, like a weighted blanket draped over your muscles. Your thoughts feel softer, less defined, as if they've been gently blurred around the edges. The city, too, seems blurred, its sharp lines softened by mist, fatigue, and the quiet magic of late night. You walk. Not with purpose. Not with direction. Just with movement. Your steps carry you down a long, straight street lined with buildings that look almost identical, brick facades, fire escapes, dark windows, the occasional dim light glowing behind a curtain. It feels like walking through a repeating pattern, like a wallpaper design, where each building is a variation on the same theme, each holding different lives behind similar walls. You pass a laundromat that is still open. Inside, rows of washing machines hum and spin, their round windows glowing softly like moons trapped in metal boxes. A few people sit on plastic chairs, watching their clothes tumble, their faces tired, their expressions neutral, their bodies slouched in that particular way that suggests both exhaustion and resignation. You pause at the window. This is another obscure cultural tidbit drifting quietly through the night. Coin-operated laundromats became widespread in New York in the early 20th century, offering working-class residents a convenient alternative to hand-washing clothes at home. Historians still debate whether laundromats were primarily symbols of modern convenience or quiet reminders of how little free time working people actually had. You watch the machine spin. Round and round. Over and over. The rhythm is soothing. Hypnotic. You feel your eyelids grow heavier just looking at them, like watching a campfire or ocean waves or a ceiling fan that you've promised yourself you'll turn off but never quite do. Eventually, you pull yourself away from the window and continue walking. The streets are almost empty now. Not entirely, but close enough that each passing person feels like a notable event, rather than just part of the background. You pass a man leaning against a wall, fast asleep, his hat pulled low over his face, his arms crossed, his body relaxed in a way that suggests he has completely surrendered to gravity. You hope he's okay. You hope he has somewhere to go in the morning. You hope he is warm enough. You hope his dreams are kind. You pass a woman standing in a doorway, smoking quietly, her face illuminated by the brief flare of her lighter. She looks tired, but calm. She exhales slowly, watching the smoke drift upward, then glances at you as you pass. Your eyes meet for half a second. She nods. You nod back. A small, wordless exchange of acknowledgement in the middle of the night, like two ships passing quietly in a fog. You walk on. You hear music again, not jazz this time, but something slower, softer, almost like a lullaby. You follow the sound and find a small apartment building with an open window on the second floor. A gramophone plays inside, its sound drifting into the street, warm and crackly, like a voice from another room calling you gently by name. You stop beneath the window and listen. The melody is simple, repetitive, comforting. It feels like the kind of song someone would play at the end of a long day, when they're too tired to think and too awake to sleep, when the space between their thoughts and the silence. You listen for a moment, then move on, carrying the melody with you like a small, invisible companion. You turn a corner and find yourself on a street you recognize from earlier. Remember the stoop where you sat before? The one with the cool metal railing and the worn stone steps. You're back there now. The building looks the same. The street lamp still hums softly. The sidewalk still glows faintly beneath its light. You pause. There's something comforting about returning to a place you've already been, even if only briefly. It feels like proof that you are not lost, even if you don't know exactly where you're going. You don't sit this time. You simply stand for a moment, breathing, looking, listening, feeling the weight of the night settle gently around you. Then you move on. You walk toward a part of the city where the buildings grow taller and closer together, where the streets narrow and the shadows deepen. You pass under an elevated train track, the metal structure looming above you like a sleeping giant. A train rumbles overhead, its sound echoing through the street, vibrating the air, shaking the pavement slightly beneath your feet. You pause under the tracks and look up as the train passes. This is your major historical fact for this stretch of the night. By the early 20th century, New York's elevated train lines and subways had transformed urban mobility, allowing people to live farther from where they worked and reshaping the city's neighborhoods. Historians still debate whether this expansion improved quality of life more than it disrupted established communities. You watch the train's windows streak by above you, each one briefly illuminated, each one holding a small slice of someone else's night, someone sitting, standing, leaning, thinking, dozing, reading, staring, existing. Then the train passes. The street returns to quiet. You walk on. You find yourself near a cluster of small shops, most closed, some boarded up, a few still glowing faintly. You pass a tailor's shop, its window displaying a half-finished suit on a mannequin, the fabric draped carefully, the pins still in place, as if the tailor simply stepped away for a moment and never quite returned. You pass a florist's shop, its windows dark, but you can still smell flowers faintly in the air, a sweet, earthy scent that feels strangely out of place at this hour, like finding a fresh loaf of bread in the middle of the desert. You pass a barber shop, its striped pole still spinning slowly, its red, white, and blue colors blurring together in a hypnotic spiral, even though the shop itself is closed and dark. You think about all the people who will fill these spaces tomorrow. The customers. The workers. The conversations. The transactions. The small, ordinary dramas of everyday life. You realize that right now, these spaces belong to no one. They are empty, quiet, waiting. And so are you. Not empty in a bad way. Empty in the way a cup is empty when it's ready to be filled. Empty in the way a page is empty when it's ready for words. Empty in the way a mind is empty when it's ready for rest. You walk a little farther, then a little slower, then slower still. Eventually, you find another bench, this one tucked into a small alcove between two buildings, sheltered from the wind, the streetlight casting a soft glow across its surface. You sit. The bench feels welcoming, like it's been waiting for you, though you know that's just your tired brain being poetic. Still, you don't correct yourself. Some illusions are better left intact. You lean back, close your eyes, and breathe. The city hums around you. Not loudly. Not insistently. Just steadily. You think about how the night has unfolded, from the bright, bustling jazz clubs to the quiet, nearly empty streets, from the loud laughter to the soft rustling of leaves, from the crowded diners to the solitary benches. You realize that the city has not changed. You have. Your pace has slowed. Your thoughts have softened. Your attention has shifted inward. The night has gently guided you here, without force, without urgency, without demand. You feel your eyelids grow heavier. You do not fight it. You let them close. You listen to the hum of the city. You feel the bench beneath you. You breathe. Slowly. Deeply. In. Out. You are not asleep. Not yet. But you are closer. Much closer. And that is enough for now. You don't remember when your eyes opened again. There's no dramatic shift, no jolt, no sudden awareness. Just a gradual return, like a tide coming in so slowly you only notice when the water is already at your ankles. The bench beneath you is still there. The alcove still shelters you. The streetlight still hums softly, like it's trying to sing you a lullaby but forgot most of the words. You sit up. Your body feels warm and heavy, the kind of heavy that comes from rest rather than exhaustion. Your thoughts feel loose, drifting, as if they've been untied from anything urgent or important. You take a slow breath and exhale just as slowly, watching your breath form faint clouds in the cool air. You stand. The street is quieter now than it was before, quieter even than the quiet you've already experienced. The night has deepened, thickened, settled into itself. It feels like the city has wrapped itself in a blanket and turned the lights down low. You begin walking again. Not because you have somewhere to go, but because your body feels like moving. Like stretching. Like floating a little farther down a slow-moving river. You pass a bakery that is just beginning to wake up. The lights inside are on. You can see a figure moving behind the counter, their silhouette bending and straightening, in a rhythm that feels ancient and comforting. You smell bread, warm, yeasty, slightly sweet, even though you're outside, even though the door is closed, even though the night air is cool and damp. This is your major historical fact for this stretch of the night. By the 1920s, New York bakeries operated around the clock, ensuring fresh bread was available for morning customers across the city. Historians still debate whether the rise of industrial bakeries diminished traditional baking crafts or simply allowed more people access to fresh food. You linger outside the bakery for a moment, breathing in the scent, imagining warm loaves cooling on racks, imagining people waking up soon to the smell of toast and coffee and new beginnings. You move on. The streets here are narrower, the buildings closer together, the air warmer somehow, as if the city itself is exhaling gently. You pass doorways where newspapers are stacked neatly, waiting for delivery. You pass trash bins that smell faintly of last night's dinners and last week's groceries and the quiet persistence of daily life. You pass a cat. It sits in the middle of the sidewalk, grooming itself with deliberate precision, licking one paw, then the other, then pausing to stare at you with mild disapproval, as if you've interrupted something important, which, to be fair, you probably have. This is your obscure cultural tidbit drifting softly through the night. Cats were common companions in urban neighborhoods, valued both for pest control and quiet companionship in cramped apartments. Historians still debate whether cats were truly beloved pets or simply tolerated roommates who occasionally earned their keep by catching mice. You nod to the cat. The cat does not nod back. This feels like an accurate representation of most human-cat relationships. You continue walking. You hear footsteps behind you. Not close. Not threatening. Just, present. Someone else walking the same street, at the same slow pace, wrapped in their own quiet world. You don't turn around. You don't feel the need to. Their footsteps eventually fade, either turning down another street or stopping somewhere behind you, or maybe just slowing until they no longer match your rhythm. You walk on. You come to a small bridge crossing a narrow canal or inlet, one of those forgotten stretches of water that exists between larger bodies, neither river nor street, neither land nor sea. The water beneath the bridge is dark and still, reflecting only the faintest hints of light from nearby windows and street lamps. You stop in the middle of the bridge. You lean against the railing. You look down at the water. The reflection is imperfect. Broken. Shimmering. But somehow beautiful in its own uneven way. You think about how much of life looks like this, reflections of something real, something solid, something bright, but never quite the thing itself. Always a little distorted. Always a little blurred. Always moving, even when the source appears still. You stay there longer than you probably should. But there is no schedule. No appointment. No obligation. Only the slow movement of time, the soft breathing of the city, the gentle weight of the night. Eventually, you push yourself away from the railing and continue walking. You find yourself in a neighborhood that feels older, heavier, more worn. The buildings are lower here, the streets narrower, the sidewalks cracked and uneven. You can smell damp stone, old wood, rust, and something faintly metallic in the air. You pass a tenement building. The windows are dark, but you can sense the lives inside, families sleeping, children dreaming, adults worrying, bodies resting, minds drifting. You imagine small kitchens, narrow beds, crowded rooms, thin walls, thin floors, thin spaces between people and their problems. This brings us to another major historical fact, quietly woven into the night air. In the early 20th century, many working-class New Yorkers lived in tenement buildings, often crowded and poorly ventilated, but full of community and resilience. Historians still debate whether tenement life fostered stronger social bonds or simply forced people to adapt to hardship with quiet endurance. You walk past the building slowly, respectfully, as if passing a sleeping giant, or perhaps a group of sleeping giants stacked on top of each other, dreaming different dreams in different rooms, breathing different breaths in the same structure. You move on. You hear a sound you haven't heard in a while, laughter. Not loud laughter. Not wild laughter. Just a soft, tired laugh drifting out of a window somewhere above you. It's brief, fleeting, and then gone, but it lingers in your mind like a warm echo. You smile. Even at this hour, even in this quiet, people are still finding small moments of joy, small moments of connection, small moments of light. You continue walking. Your steps slow again. Your breathing deepens again. Your thoughts soften again. You feel the night pulling you inward, not downward, not into darkness, but into stillness. You pass another park, smaller than the others, quieter, more hidden. The benches are empty. The paths are dim. The trees stand like silent witnesses, their leaves barely moving in the still air. You enter the park and sit on a bench. The bench is cool beneath you. The air is cool around you. The world feels cool, calm, quiet. You close your eyes. You breathe. You listen. You feel. The city hums softly in the background, like a distant machine, or a distant ocean, or a distant memory. It does not intrude. It does not demand. It simply exists. You let your mind drift. Not toward specific thoughts, but toward the absence of thought. Not toward specific memories, but toward the soft blur where memories fade. Not toward specific worries, but toward the quiet space where worries dissolve. You realize, dimly, that you are not walking through the city anymore. The city is walking through you. Each street, each sound, each light, each shadow has left a small imprint, a small echo, a small trace, and now those traces are moving gently through your mind, like ripples on water, slowly spreading, slowly fading. You sit there until you feel ready to move again. And then, slowly, gently, you stand. You leave the park without ceremony. No farewell. No lingering glance. Just a quiet step back onto the sidewalk, as if the park never existed, or perhaps as if it continues to exist behind you, holding your absence the same way it once held your presence. You walk. The streets feel different now. Not unfamiliar, not strange, just softer. Like the city has been slightly dimmed, slightly muted, slightly turned down, like someone lowering the volume on a radio that's been playing all night. You pass a row of brownstones. Their stoops are empty, their windows dark, their doors closed. You imagine the lives inside, families sleeping, dreams unfolding, alarms waiting patiently to ring. You imagine kitchens with tables, tables with chairs, chairs with coats draped over them, coats with pockets holding keys, receipts, small forgotten objects that will be rediscovered in the morning. You pass a newspaper stand. It is closed, but tomorrow's papers are already stacked inside, visible through the glass, their headlines hidden, their stories waiting. You wonder what tomorrow will bring. You wonder what headlines will greet the city when it wakes. You wonder how many people will be surprised, disappointed, relieved, or simply unsurprised by whatever news arrives. This is your major historical fact for this stretch of the night. By the 1920s, New York had dozens of competing newspapers, each shaping public opinion and reflecting different political, social, and cultural perspectives. Historians still debate whether this diversity of voices strengthened democracy or simply fragmented public understanding. You walk on. You hear the faint sound of a radio somewhere, a low murmur, a voice, maybe a song, maybe news, maybe a story, maybe just static drifting through the night air. The sound is indistinct, but comforting, like hearing someone else breathe in the next room. You pass a diner that is still open. Inside, a few people sit at the counter, nursing coffee, staring into space, waiting for something, food, time, morning, meaning, or perhaps just the end of their shift. The cook stands behind the counter, flipping something on the grill, wiping their hands on a towel, moving with slow, practiced motions. You pause at the window. You watch steam rise from cups. You watch hands wrap around mugs. You watch eyes blink slowly. You watch shoulders slump and straighten and slump again. This brings us to an obscure cultural tidbit drifting quietly through the diner's warm glow. All-night diners became cultural staples in urban America, serving as informal gathering spaces for night workers, artists, insomniacs, and anyone who needed food, coffee, or company at odd hours. Historians still debate whether diners were more important for the meals they served or the conversations they hosted. You don't go inside. You don't feel hungry. Not for food, anyway. You move on. You walk toward a part of the city that feels quieter still, where the buildings grow smaller and the streets grow darker. The street lamps are farther apart here, leaving longer stretches of shadow between pools of light. You walk through these shadows slowly, comfortably, as if they are not empty but full of quiet, full of rest, full of nothing at all. You hear a distant horn. Not a car horn. A ship's horn. Low, long, echoing, like a giant exhaling over the water. The sound carries through the night, through the buildings, through the streets, through you. You pause. You listen. You imagine a ship moving slowly through dark water, its lights glowing, its engines humming, its passengers sleeping, its crew working, its cargo resting. You imagine the water beneath it, black and deep, reflecting the stars and the city and the moon, carrying everything forward without complaint. You resume walking. You reach another bridge. This one is larger than the last, spanning a wider stretch of water, connecting two parts of the city that feel both separate and inseparable. You walk across it slowly, your footsteps echoing faintly on the pavement, the railing cool beneath your hand. You stop halfway across. You lean against the railing. You look out over the water. The city stretches out on both sides, lights scattered across the darkness like constellations, buildings rising and falling like waves, windows glowing like distant stars. You feel small. Not insignificantly small. Not unimportant small. Just, appropriately small. Like a person standing under a wide sky, or beside a deep ocean, or in the middle of a long night. This is another major historical fact, drifting quietly across the water. By the 1920s, New York had become one of the largest cities in the world, a global hub of commerce, culture, immigration, and innovation. Historians still debate whether its rapid growth was more beneficial or more disruptive to the people who lived there. You stand there for a while. You breathe. You feel the cool air on your face. You feel the solid railing beneath your hands. You feel the steady presence of the city around you. You feel grounded. Eventually, you push away from the railing and continue walking. You cross the rest of the bridge. You step onto the other side. The street here is quieter, darker, more residential. You pass rows of houses, their windows dark, their porches empty, their gardens still. You imagine morning light filling these streets, children walking to school, adults heading to work, the quiet streets becoming loud again, the empty sidewalks becoming crowded again. But for now, they belong to the night. And for now, the night belongs to you. You walk slowly. You breathe deeply. You let your thoughts drift. You feel your eyelids grow heavier again. You feel your body relax further. You feel your mind soften further. You feel yourself moving closer to something that feels like sleep, or perhaps something just before sleep, or perhaps something that feels like rest without fully disappearing. You find another bench. This one sits beneath a tree. The leaves above you whisper softly in the night air, their sound gentle, repetitive, soothing. The bench is wooden, worn smooth by years of use, years of waiting, years of holding tired bodies and quiet thoughts. You sit. You lean back. You close your eyes. You breathe. In. Out. Slowly. Deeply. The city hums. The leaves whisper. The night holds you. You do not fight it. You do not rush it. You simply allow yourself to be here. And for now, that is enough. You wake the way fog lifts from a river, not suddenly, not completely, just enough to reveal shapes and light without fully letting go of the softness. The bench is still beneath you. The tree is still above you. The night is still wrapped around the city like a blanket that's been used for 100 years and somehow still smells faintly of clean linen. You sit up slowly. Your body feels rested, but not energized. More like, gently charged. Like a lamp that's been turned on low and left that way long enough to forget it was ever dark. You stand. The sidewalk stretches ahead of you, empty and quiet. Streetlights hum softly, their light pooling on the pavement like small, warm lakes. You step into one of those pools and feel, irrationally, like you've just entered a warm bath for your feet. You begin walking again. You pass a small grocery store with its lights on, though the door is locked. Inside, you can see crates of produce stacked neatly, apples, oranges, potatoes, onions. The colors look brighter under the artificial light, like they're trying to convince themselves it's daytime. This is your major historical fact for this stretch of the night. By the 1920s, urban grocery stores increasingly relied on refrigeration and electric lighting, transforming how food was stored and sold. Historians still debate whether these innovations improved nutrition more than they altered traditional food cultures. You imagine the shopkeeper inside, moving quietly, arranging shelves, checking stock, preparing for the morning rush that will arrive like a wave and recede just as quickly. You move on. The street curves slightly, leading you toward a cluster of buildings that feel taller, closer, more crowded, even at this hour. You can sense the density of life packed into these structures, like books on a shelf, each one containing a story, a voice, a memory. You hear music. Not loud. Not clear. Just a faint melody drifting through the air, like a dream you half remember upon waking. You follow the sound, your feet moving almost on their own, drawn not by curiosity but by comfort. You reach a narrow building with a single light glowing above a door. There is no sign. There is no marquee. Just the sound of music leaking through the walls, soft and slow, like someone practicing rather than performing. You pause outside. You listen. You hear a piano. Not flashy. Not fast. Just gentle chords, slow progressions, hesitant notes that seem to be testing the air before committing to it. Occasionally, you hear a trumpet join in, softly, like it doesn't want to wake anyone. This is your obscure cultural tidbit for this section. Many jazz musicians in the 1920s practiced late at night, often in small, informal spaces, developing new sounds away from crowded clubs and commercial pressures. Historians still debate whether jazz evolved more in formal venues or in these quiet, unrecorded moments. You lean against the building. You close your eyes. You let the music wash over you, not as entertainment, but as atmosphere. Like rain. Like wind. Like breathing. You stand there longer than you intended. Time loosens its grip. Minutes stretch. Thoughts blur. Eventually, the music fades. Not suddenly. Not abruptly. Just gradually, as if the players themselves are growing tired, their hands slowing, their breath softening, their energy dissolving into the night. You open your eyes. You step away. You continue walking. The street widens. The buildings grow taller. You find yourself back in a more central part of the city, though still quiet, still subdued, still resting. You pass a hotel with its lights on in the lobby, the glass doors reflecting the street lamps, the world inside looking warm and calm and quietly awake. You pause outside. You imagine the night clerk behind the desk, flipping through a ledger, sipping coffee, watching the door, waiting for guests who may or may not arrive. You imagine travelers upstairs, sleeping in unfamiliar beds, dreaming unfamiliar dreams, far from home and somehow closer to themselves. This brings us to another major historical fact, woven softly into the hum of the lobby lights. By the 1920s, New York's hotels catered to a growing population of travelers, entertainers, and businesspeople, reflecting the city's role as a national and international crossroads. Historians still debate whether these hotels fostered cultural exchange or simply commodified it. You move on. You walk past a row of street lamps. One flickers. Not out, just slightly, like it's blinking, like it's tired, like it's considering going to sleep but deciding, reluctantly, to stay awake a little longer. You feel a kinship with that street lamp. You keep walking. You feel your pace slow. You feel your breathing deepen. You feel your thoughts soften. You feel the night pulling you inward again. Not downward. Not into darkness. Just into stillness. You find yourself in another small park. This one has a fountain in the center, though it's turned off for the night. The basin holds a shallow pool of water that reflects the streetlights and the stars and the faint glow of nearby windows. The water is still, like a held breath. You walk to the edge of the fountain. You look into the water. You see your reflection. Not clearly. Not sharply. Just a suggestion of a face, a shape, a presence. You think about how rarely you really see yourself. Not in mirrors. Not in photos. But in moments like this, quiet, unguarded, unobserved, when you are simply here. This brings us to another obscure cultural tidbit. Urban fountains often served as social gathering spaces during the day, but at night, they became quiet landmarks, symbols of stillness in the midst of motion. Historians still debate whether public fountains were more decorative or more functional in shaping urban life. You sit on the edge of the fountain. You let your legs dangle over the side. You lean back on your hands. You look up at the sky. The stars are faint, muted by the city lights, but still present, still visible if you look closely enough. You imagine people in rural areas seeing thousands of stars, while you see dozens, and yet both are enough. You breathe. In. out. Slowly. You feel your eyelids grow heavy again. You feel your body sink deeper into the moment. You feel your mind drift towards something soft and quiet and unimportant. You stay there until you no longer feel the need to move. And then, slowly, gently, you stand. You walk away from the fountain as if leaving a thought unfinished. Not because it needs finishing, but because it doesn't. Some things are better left open. Some moments are better left unclosed. Some nights are better left unmeasured. You walk. The street ahead is long and straight, lined with buildings that seem to lean slightly inward, as if sharing secrets with each other across the narrow space between them. The windows are dark, but not empty. The doors are closed, but not unwelcoming. The air feels warmer here, thicker, heavier with the scent of brick, dust, and faint traces of cooking. You pass a row of small shops. A tailor's shop. A shoemaker's workshop. A barber's shop. All closed. All quiet. All waiting. This is your major historical fact for this section. In the 1920s, small neighborhood shops formed the backbone of urban economies, providing essential services and fostering close-knit community relationships. Historians still debate whether these small businesses declined primarily due to economic forces or cultural shifts. You imagine the tailor inside, sewing by lamplight, measuring fabric, fitting suits, adjusting hems. You imagine the shoemaker repairing worn soles, polishing leather, breathing in the scent of glue and polish. You imagine the barber sweeping hair, sharpening razors, chatting with customers about weather, sports, and life. You move on. You hear a distant train. Not above you. Not below you. Somewhere far away, moving through the night, carrying people and cargo and stories across the dark. The sound is low, rhythmic, steady. You find it comforting. Like a heartbeat. Like a reminder that even while you walk slowly, the world continues to move. This brings us to another obscure cultural tidbit drifting softly through the air. Night trains were essential to urban supply chains, transporting goods and people during hours when city streets were less crowded. Historians still debate whether nighttime transportation improved efficiency more than it disrupted sleep and community life. You walk on. You feel your shoulders relax. You feel your jaw unclench. You feel your thoughts lose their sharp edges. You feel yourself becoming less solid. Not disappearing. Just softening. You reach a quiet intersection. No cars. No people. No noise. Just 4 empty streets stretching outward like spokes from a wheel, each one leading somewhere, each one holding its own version of the night. You stop in the middle of the intersection. You turn slowly in a circle. You look down each street. You feel a strange sense of freedom. Not the freedom of choosing where to go, but the freedom of knowing you don't have to choose at all. You pick a direction at random. You walk. The street slopes gently downward, leading you toward a part of the city that feels closer to the water. You can smell it in the air, salt, dampness, metal, something cold and alive. The sound of distant waves or boat engines or water against stone drifts faintly toward you. You follow the slope. You pass warehouses. Large, dark buildings with few windows, heavy doors, and thick walls. They feel solid, immovable, like they've been standing here long before you arrived and will remain long after you leave. This is your major historical fact drifting quietly between the warehouse walls. New York's waterfront warehouses were central to global trade in the early 20th century, storing goods from around the world and fueling the city's economy. Historians still debate whether waterfront development benefited local communities or primarily served distant commercial interests. You walk between two warehouses. The street narrows. The light dims. The air grows cooler. You feel the presence of the water nearby, even if you can't see it yet. You hear a gull. One. Then another. Their cries echo softly through the night, sharp but distant, like memories of the ocean calling from somewhere far away. You reach the end of the street. You step onto a pier. The water stretches out before you, dark and wide and calm. The city lights reflect on its surface, broken and shimmering, like stars scattered across a moving sky. You walk to the edge of the pier. You stop. You lean against the railing. You look out over the water. You feel the cool air on your face. You feel the steady presence of the city behind you. You feel the open space of the water before you. You feel balanced between two worlds. Land and water. Noise and silence. Movement and stillness. You breathe. In. Out. Slowly. This brings us to one more obscure cultural tidbit, floating gently across the water. Piers often serve not only as commercial hubs but also as informal social spaces, where people gather to walk, talk, fish, and watch the water. Historians still debate whether these spaces were more valuable for commerce or for community. You stay there for a long time. Long enough to forget how long you've been there. Long enough to forget what time it is. Long enough to forget what day it is. Long enough to forget, briefly, who you are. Not in a frightening way. In a peaceful way. Like setting down a heavy bag you didn't realize you were carrying. Eventually, you turn away from the water. You walk back along the pier. You step back onto the street. You feel the city around you again. You walk. You breathe. You exist. And that, for now, is enough. In a peaceful way. Like setting down a heavy bag you didn't realize you were carrying. Eventually, you turn away from the water. You walk back along the pier. You step back onto the street. You feel the city around you again. You walk. You breathe. You exist. And that, for now, is enough. You walk back from the water with the kind of calm that doesn't announce itself. Not relief. Not joy. Just steadiness. The street feels slightly warmer now, as if the buildings have been quietly holding on to heat and are only just now releasing it back into the air. The pavement is smooth beneath your shoes, worn down by years of footsteps, carts, wagons, and people who probably never imagined someone like you would be walking here a century later, listening to their echoes. You pass a closed cafe. The windows are fogged from earlier cooking, the faint outlines of tables and chairs barely visible through the glass. A small chalkboard sign leans against the door, the last message still written in soft white letters, "Soup of the day." You don't know what kind of soup it was, and somehow that makes it feel more meaningful than if you did. This is your major historical fact for this section. By the 1920s, cafes had become central gathering places in urban life, offering affordable meals and social spaces for workers, artists, and wanderers alike. Historians still debate whether cafes fostered genuine community or simply provided temporary refuge from isolation. You imagine the cafe earlier that evening, cups clinking, chairs scraping softly against the floor, voices overlapping in gentle conversation, someone laughing too loudly, someone else staring quietly into their coffee, lost in thought. Now, it rests. Like the city itself. Like you. You continue walking. You notice a newspaper folded neatly outside a doorway, likely left by a delivery boy hours earlier. The headline is partially visible, but you don't lean in to read it. You don't want to know what the world was worried about today. Tonight belongs to smaller things. This brings us to an obscure cultural tidbit. Newspaper delivery in the early 20th century often began before dawn, with papers left at doorsteps or thrown from bicycles. Historians still debate whether early morning delivery shaped reading habits more than evening editions. You step over the newspaper carefully, as if it were sleeping. You walk on. You hear footsteps behind you. Not fast. Not slow. Just steady. You don't turn around. Not because you're afraid, but because you're tired in a good way, the way that makes you trust the night instead of question it. The footsteps pass you, belonging to a man in a long coat and hat, hands in his pockets, gaze fixed ahead. He nods once as he passes, a small, quiet acknowledgement of shared existence. You nod back. Two strangers, briefly aware of each other, then gone again. This brings you to another major historical fact. Men's fashion in the 1920s increasingly emphasized suits, hats, and tailored coats, reflecting both practicality and evolving social norms. Historians still debate whether this shift represented genuine cultural change or simply economic recovery after World War I. You walk on. The street curves. You follow it. You pass a row of brick buildings with fire escapes zigzagging down their facades like metal vines. You imagine people leaning out of those windows earlier in the evening, smoking, talking, laughing, watching the street below, feeling connected to something larger than themselves, even if they couldn't quite name what that something was. You hear faint music again. This time, it's not jazz. It's something softer. A gramophone playing behind a closed window, the needle slightly warped, the melody drifting through the glass in uneven waves. You recognize the sound of a waltz, slow and looping, like a lullaby that forgot it was meant for dancing. This is your obscure cultural tidbit. Gramophones were common household items in the 1920s, bringing recorded music into private homes and transforming how people experienced sound. Historians still debate whether recorded music diminished live performance or expanded musical access. You stop briefly outside the window. You listen. You imagine a couple inside, dancing slowly across a small living room, careful not to bump into the furniture, moving together not because the music is exciting but because it feels necessary, like breathing. You smile. You move on. You reach another intersection. This one has a street clock mounted on a tall pole, its face illuminated softly, its hands pointing to an hour that feels both late and early at the same time. You don't read the exact time. You don't need to. The night has its own clock, and it doesn't measure minutes. It measures moods. You cross the street. You walk into a residential neighborhood. The houses are smaller here, closer together, their stoops worn smooth by countless footsteps, their doors painted in muted colors that look gentler under streetlight glow. You pass a house with a light still on in the front room, the curtains partially drawn. You glimpse a woman sitting at a small table, sewing by lamplight, her posture bent but steady, her hands moving with practiced precision. This is your major historical fact for this section. Home sewing remained common in the 1920s, especially among working-class families, as a way to save money and maintain clothing. Historians still debate whether home sewing declined due to industrialization or shifting cultural values. You walk quietly past. You feel like a guest in someone else's dream. You move on. The street grows quieter. The houses grow darker. The sounds fade. Your footsteps become the loudest thing in the world. You feel yourself slowing. Not because you're tired. Because you don't want to arrive anywhere too quickly. You reach a small footbridge crossing a narrow canal or drainage channel, the water barely visible in the darkness, but audible if you listen closely. You stop on the bridge. You lean on the railing. You look down. You see the faint reflection of a streetlight shimmering on the water's surface, distorted and gentle, like a memory that refuses to be sharp. You breathe. You think. You don't think. You stay there until the night feels like it has wrapped around you completely. And then, slowly, gently, you move on. You leave the bridge behind with the same quiet ease you've carried through the night. Not rushed. Not lingering. Just moving. The street ahead slopes upward now, guiding you back toward the heart of the city, where buildings grow taller, lights grow brighter, and the night feels less like a whisper and more like a hum. You walk. You notice a bakery. Closed. Dark. But the air around it still smells faintly of bread and sugar and something warm and comforting, like a memory of breakfast that hasn't happened yet. The scent feels like a promise, or maybe a reminder that the morning exists, even if you're not ready to meet it. This is your major historical fact for this section. Urban bakeries in the early 20th century often operated overnight to prepare fresh bread for morning customers. Historians still debate whether overnight baking improved quality more than it strained workers' health. You imagine the bakers inside, hours earlier, kneading dough, shaping loaves, sliding trays into ovens, sweating gently in the warm air, moving with quiet efficiency while the rest of the city slept. You walk on. You pass a small park again. Not the same one as before, but similar, trees, benches, lampposts, a quiet path winding through the middle like a ribbon laid gently on the grass. You step into the park. The air feels cooler here. Damp. Alive. You hear crickets. You hear leaves rustling. You hear your own breathing. You walk slowly along the path. You remember the bench you rested on earlier. You remember the fountain. You remember the pier. The night is beginning to feel like a loop, gently folding back on itself, not repeating exactly, but echoing. This brings us to an obscure cultural tidbit. Urban parks were designed as lungs of the city, offering fresh air, greenery, and quiet spaces for rest and reflection. Historians still debate whether parks served public health more than social control. You exit the park. You step back onto the sidewalk. You notice a street vendor's cart parked against a building, covered with a cloth, resting until morning. You imagine it earlier, surrounded by customers, the vendor calling out softly, the smell of roasted nuts or hot dogs or coffee drifting through the air, the warmth of food in cold hands. You continue walking. You feel your eyelids grow heavier again. You feel your body begin to crave stillness. Not sleep, exactly. Just rest. You pass a movie theater. The lights are off. The posters still hang in glass cases, advertising films that played earlier that evening. You don't read the titles. You don't need to. The idea of stories being told in dark rooms feels enough. This is your major historical fact for this section. By the 1920s, silent films had become a dominant form of entertainment, shaping popular culture and shared experiences. Historians still debate whether silent cinema encouraged imagination more than later sound films. You imagine the audience earlier, sitting in rows, watching flickering images, listening to a piano or orchestra accompany the film, laughing together, gasping together, sharing a story without words. You move on. You reach a quiet street lined with apartment buildings. You see lights in a few windows. You imagine people inside, reading, sleeping, talking, thinking, dreaming. You feel a sense of closeness to them, even though you don't know them. Not closeness in the sense of friendship, but closeness in the sense of shared existence. You stop walking. You stand still. You listen. You hear the city. Not as noise. As presence. As breath. As life. You feel yourself becoming quieter inside. You feel your thoughts slow. You feel your awareness soften. You feel your body relax. You feel yourself becoming part of the night rather than a visitor in it. You take a deep breath. In. Out. Slowly. You let it go. You turn toward a building. You walk to a stoop. You sit. You rest. And for now, that is enough. You sit for a moment longer than you intended. Not because you are tired in the way that collapses a body, but tired in the way that smooths the edges of everything. The stoop beneath you is cool stone, slightly damp, worn smooth by decades of people pausing here, to rest, to talk, to wait, to think, to do nothing in particular. You run your hand across it absently, as if the stone might still remember them. The night air settles around you like a blanket that forgot how to be heavy. You stand. You step back onto the sidewalk. You walk. The street is quieter now. Not silent, cities never truly are, but softened, as if the sound has been turned down a few notches, like someone gently lowering the volume on the world. You pass a corner shop. Closed. Dark. The display window still shows neatly arranged goods, canned food, soap bars, jars of sweets, rows of neatly stacked boxes with lettering you can barely read. You imagine the shopkeeper earlier in the evening, straightening the shelves, sweeping the floor, locking the door, then walking home under these same streetlights. This is your major historical fact for this section. Small neighborhood shops were a backbone of urban life in the early 20th century, providing daily necessities within walking distance. Historians still debate whether the rise of chain stores diminished community bonds or simply changed how people formed them. You continue walking. You notice a cat. It sits in the middle of the sidewalk, unbothered by the world, its tail wrapped neatly around its paws, its eyes half closed. It watches you approach without fear or interest, the way creatures do when they have learned that humans are mostly harmless furniture. You slow your pace. You pass it carefully. It does not move. This brings us to an obscure cultural tidbit. Urban cats were common in the early 1900s, valued for pest control and often unofficially adopted by neighborhoods. Historians still debate whether their presence reduced rodent populations more than sanitation efforts. You glance back. The cat is still there. Still sitting. Still being a cat. You walk on. The street begins to slope downward now, guiding you toward another part of the city, one that feels quieter, older, and slightly more forgotten. The buildings here are narrower, their facades darker, their windows smaller. The air smells faintly of damp stone and old wood. You pass a building with a sign barely visible above the door, "Rooms for Rent." The letters are faded, the paint chipped, the wood warped slightly by time and weather. You imagine travelers staying here, workers passing through, immigrants arriving, people in between chapters of their lives. This is your major historical fact for this section. Rooming houses and boarding houses were widespread in early 20th century cities, offering affordable housing to transient populations. Historians still debate whether these spaces fostered community or intensified isolation. You continue walking. You hear footsteps again. This time, lighter. Quicker. You turn your head slightly and see a young woman walking toward you, coat pulled tight around her, scarf wrapped around her neck, eyes focused ahead. She passes you without looking up, her steps quick and purposeful, as if the night is something to move through rather than settle into. You watch her disappear down the street. You walk on. You reach another intersection. This one feels emptier. The streetlights are spaced farther apart. The shadows are longer. The silence is deeper. You stop at the corner. You lean against a lamppost. You look up. You see the glow of the light spreading in a soft halo above you, illuminating tiny particles of dust and mist drifting slowly through the air. They move lazily, unbothered by direction or destination. You find yourself watching them. Not thinking. Not planning. Just watching. This brings us to an obscure cultural tidbit. Streetlights in the 1920s increasingly used electric bulbs, replacing gas lamps and extending safe nighttime activity. Historians still debate whether electric lighting changed urban social patterns more than transportation advances. You step away from the lamppost. You continue walking. The street opens up into a small square. Not a grand plaza. Just a modest open space with a few benches, a couple of trees, and a statue at the center. The statue is difficult to make out in the low light, but you can tell it depicts a man standing tall, one hand raised, the other holding something, perhaps a book, perhaps a tool, perhaps nothing at all. You walk closer. You read the plaque. The name is unfamiliar. The dates mean little. The words speak of service, dedication, and community. You step back. You sit on a bench. You rest. You think about all the people who have sat here before you. You think about all the people who will sit here after you. You think about how time keeps moving forward, but nights like this feel suspended, as if they exist outside of time entirely. You breathe. In. Out. Slowly. You close your eyes for a moment. Not to sleep. Just to rest. You open them again. You stand. You walk on. You leave the small square behind with the same quiet awareness that has guided you all night. Not with urgency. Not with hesitation. Just with motion. The street ahead curves gently, leading you toward an area where the buildings grow taller again, the lights brighter, and the night feels slightly more awake. You sense, without knowing how, that you are moving closer to the heart of something, not necessarily a place, but a feeling. You walk. You notice a fire escape ladder hanging down from the side of a building, its rungs catching the light in thin silver lines. You imagine someone climbing down it earlier, maybe for air, maybe for escape, maybe just because they felt like it. This is your major historical fact for this section. Fire escapes became standard architectural features in urban buildings after major city fires in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Historians still debate whether fire escapes significantly improved safety or primarily offered psychological reassurance. You walk on. You hear faint laughter drifting from an open window above. Not loud. Not wild. Just the soft sound of people enjoying each other's company, the kind of laughter that doesn't demand attention but makes the night feel warmer simply by existing. You glance up. You don't see anyone. You smile anyway. This brings us to an obscure cultural tidbit. Open windows were common in pre-air conditioning cities, allowing sounds, smells, and conversations to drift freely between private and public spaces. Historians still debate whether this openness strengthened social bonds or reduced privacy. You continue walking. You pass a newsstand. Closed. The stacks of newspapers and magazines are neatly arranged behind glass, their covers frozen in time until morning. You notice one magazine featuring a glamorous woman on the cover, her hair styled perfectly, her gaze confident and distant, as if she belongs to a world that exists somewhere between reality and imagination. You think about how people must have looked at those images earlier, with admiration, envy, curiosity, aspiration. You walk on. You reach a street with streetcar tracks embedded in the pavement, faintly visible beneath the dim light. You run your foot along one of the rails, feeling the cool metal under your shoe. This is your major historical fact for this section. Streetcars were a primary mode of urban transportation in the early 20th century, shaping city layouts and daily routines. Historians still debate whether streetcars improved urban life more than they limited city growth. You imagine a streetcar passing through earlier, its bell ringing softly, its windows glowing, passengers inside swaying gently with the motion, each lost in their own quiet world. You walk along the tracks for a few steps. Then you step back onto the sidewalk. You continue walking. You notice a man standing outside a building, smoking a cigarette, the ember glowing faintly in the darkness. He exhales slowly, the smoke drifting upward in thin, pale ribbons before dissolving into the night air. You nod to him. He nods back. No words. No need. You move on. You reach another intersection. This one feels busier. Not in movement. In presence. You can feel the city here, even when it's still. You stand for a moment. You listen. You hear distant music. You hear distant traffic. You hear distant voices. You hear your own breathing. You feel grounded. You feel calm. You feel present. You take a deep breath. In. Out. Slowly. You realize something quietly important. The night has not been something you passed through. It has been something you've lived. Moment by moment. Step by step. Breath by breath. And now, gently, without fanfare, you feel yourself ready to move toward whatever comes next, not with urgency, not with resistance, but with acceptance. You take one last look around. The buildings. The lights. The shadows. The quiet. The city. Then you turn. You walk. And the night walks with you. You walk a little more slowly now, not because you are tired, but because the night itself seems to have slowed. The city has exhaled. Not all at once, but gradually, like someone settling into bed after a long day, adjusting pillows, smoothing sheets, deciding, finally, that this position will do. The street beneath your feet feels different. Not physically, stone is still stone, but emotionally. It feels less like a path and more like a pause. You pass a closed theater. The marquee lights are off, but the outline of the sign still glows faintly, like a memory refusing to fade completely. Posters are pasted on the front wall, their edges curling, their colors muted by time and weather. One features a man in a sharp suit, a woman in a flowing dress, both frozen in dramatic poses that promise romance, conflict, and resolution, all in under 2 hours, conveniently. This is your major historical fact for this section. Movie theaters rapidly expanded in the 1910s and 1920s, becoming a dominant form of mass entertainment. Historians still debate whether cinema strengthened social cohesion or encouraged emotional escapism. You imagine the theater earlier, the crowd, the ticket taker, the smell of popcorn or roasted nuts, the quiet hush that falls just before the lights dim. Now, it stands empty, a building full of stories resting between tellings. You walk on. You notice a paper boy's cart parked near the curb, empty now, its wheels angled slightly, as if it was abandoned mid-thought. You imagine the boy earlier in the evening, selling the last papers of the day, calling out headlines with a voice that carries farther than it should for someone so young. This brings us to an obscure cultural tidbit. Newsboys often worked late hours, and many were part of informal networks that helped one another navigate city life. Historians still debate whether these networks were protective communities or necessary responses to economic hardship. You walk past the cart. You turn a corner. The street narrows. The buildings lean inward slightly, as if they are tired too and leaning on each other for support. Laundry lines stretch between windows, some still holding garments that sway gently in the night breeze, shirts, dresses, sheets, small reminders that people live real lives behind these walls, even when you cannot see them. You glance up. You imagine the rooms behind the windows. You imagine the people inside. Some sleeping. Some reading. Some talking softly. Some lying awake, thinking about things they cannot quite name. You walk on. You hear the faint sound of a radio playing somewhere above you, a distant voice, a soft melody, a fragment of music drifting into the street. You cannot make out the words, but you recognize the feeling, comfort, familiarity, the sense that someone, somewhere, is not alone. This is your major historical fact for this section. Radio ownership expanded rapidly in the 1920s, transforming how people accessed news, music, and entertainment. Historians still debate whether radio unified culture or diluted local traditions. You pause. You listen. Then you continue walking. You pass a small bakery. Closed now. The windows are dark, but the scent of bread still lingers faintly in the air, as if the building itself remembers the warmth of ovens and the rhythm of early morning work. You imagine bakers arriving before dawn, kneading dough, shaping loaves, filling the air with warmth long before the city wakes. You walk on. You reach another intersection. This one has a fire hydrant painted a deep, dark color, red or green or something in between, hard to tell in the low light. You rest your hand on it briefly, feeling the cool metal under your palm, grounded, real. You think about how many times this hydrant has been used, fires extinguished, streets cleaned, children splashed during summer heat. It has seen more of the city's life than most people ever will. You walk on. The street widens again. The buildings stand taller. The lights grow brighter. You feel the city's pulse returning, gently, like a heartbeat growing stronger as someone stirs from sleep. You reach a busier avenue. Cars pass occasionally now, their headlights sweeping across the pavement, briefly illuminating your shadow before carrying it away again. You stand at the corner, watching the lights move, watching the city breathe. This is your major historical fact for this section. Automobile ownership increased significantly in the 1920s, reshaping urban mobility and infrastructure. Historians still debate whether cars improved quality of life or accelerated social and environmental challenges. You step off the curb. You cross the street. You walk on. You notice a hotel entrance. The door is closed, but the lobby inside is dimly lit, warm and inviting, like a quiet refuge. You imagine travelers inside, some just arriving, some just leaving, some staying longer than planned, some not long enough. You continue walking. You feel the night shifting again. Not ending. Not beginning. Just moving. Like you. You find yourself walking beneath a row of tall buildings whose windows rise in neat, repeating patterns, like a grid drawn carefully across the sky. Some windows glow faintly, others remain dark, and you cannot help but imagine the small, individual worlds contained within each rectangle of light. Each one a room. Each one a story. Each one a pause. You walk. You pass a hotel porter standing near the entrance of a building, his uniform neat, his posture relaxed, his face calm. He looks as though he has been standing there for hours, not because he must, but because it feels right to be here, between the street and the shelter, between movement and rest. You nod. He nods back. No words. Just recognition. This is your major historical fact for this section. Hotel porters and doormen played important roles in urban life, offering both security and social mediation in busy city environments. Historians still debate whether these roles reinforced class divisions or created essential bridges between social groups. You walk on. You hear a distant horn, not loud, not urgent, just present. It echoes briefly between the buildings, then fades, leaving the night unchanged but slightly more textured, like a ripple in still water. You pass a bookshop. Closed. The display window still holds carefully arranged volumes, their spines aligned, their titles barely visible in the dim light. You imagine readers earlier in the day, browsing, flipping pages, losing track of time, something you understand deeply, even if you are not holding a book right now. This brings us to an obscure cultural tidbit. Bookshops in the early 20th century often doubled as informal gathering spaces for writers, thinkers, and quiet dreamers. Historians still debate whether these spaces influenced literary movements or simply reflected them. You walk on. You reach a small park. Not a grand one. Just a patch of green surrounded by iron fencing, with a few benches, a couple of trees, and a fountain at the center. The fountain is off now, its basin empty, its surface dry and quiet, waiting for daylight to give it purpose again. You step inside. You walk along the path. You sit on a bench. You rest. You listen. You hear leaves rustling faintly in the breeze. You hear distant traffic. You hear nothing else. You feel the ground beneath you. You feel the air around you. You feel yourself in this moment. This is your major historical fact for this section. Urban parks expanded in the late 19th and early 20th centuries as part of public health and urban reform movements. Historians still debate whether parks were designed more for public welfare or social control. You stand. You leave the park. You walk back onto the sidewalk. You notice a man standing near a newspaper vending box, reading the last edition of the day by the glow of a streetlight. His face is calm, focused, unhurried, as if the world can wait while he finishes this paragraph. You pass him quietly. You walk on. You feel the night becoming deeper now, not darker, but richer, thicker, like a blanket layered gently over the city. The air feels cooler. The sounds feel softer. The spaces between things feel larger. You reach another intersection. This one is wide. Open. Quiet. You stop at the corner. You look down the street. It stretches far ahead, straight and steady, lined with lights that grow smaller and dimmer as they recede into the distance. You feel a strange comfort looking at it, not because you intend to walk all the way down it, but because it exists, and because you can. You take a deep breath. In. Out. Slowly. You think, briefly, about the people who lived here 100 years ago. What they hoped for. What they worried about. What they dreamed of. What they never had time to think about. You realize that, in many ways, you are not so different. You turn. You walk. And the city continues its quiet, steady breathing around you. You walk now with the kind of steadiness that comes from not needing to arrive anywhere. Not soon. Not at all. The street beneath you feels familiar, even though you cannot remember ever walking here before. This is how cities work, they teach you their rhythms without ever giving you a syllabus. You pass a diner. Not a bright, modern one. An older one. Chrome trim dulled by time. A long counter inside. A row of stools. A few tables by the windows. The lights inside are low, warm, steady, like the diner itself is trying not to wake anyone. You pause at the window. Inside, a man sits alone at the counter, stirring his coffee slowly, as if the spoon is moving time rather than liquid. A waitress stands behind the counter, wiping a cup, her movements unhurried, practiced, calm. You imagine the sounds inside, the clink of china, the hiss of the coffee machine, the low murmur of voices, the gentle background hum of refrigeration and electricity. This is your major historical fact for this section. Diners and luncheonettes became common in American cities in the early 20th century, offering affordable meals and late-night comfort. Historians still debate whether diners primarily served working-class needs or functioned as social leveling spaces. You walk on. You feel the sidewalk slope slightly upward now, guiding you toward a part of the city that feels both quieter and older. The buildings here are narrower, their bricks darker, their windows fewer. The air smells faintly of old wood, dust, and something you cannot quite name, maybe time. You pass a barber shop. Closed. The striped pole outside is still, the colors muted in the dim light. You imagine the shop earlier, the hum of clippers, the smell of shaving cream, the rhythm of conversation drifting between chair and mirror. This brings us to an obscure cultural tidbit. Barber shops in the early 1900s often served as informal social hubs, especially for working-class men. Historians still debate whether these spaces fostered community or reinforced social divisions. You continue walking. You reach a narrow alley. You pause. You look down it. The walls rise close on either side, bricks darkened by age and moisture. A faint light glows at the far end, but the middle is shadowed, quiet, waiting. You do not enter. Not because you are afraid. Because you are content where you are. You walk on. You pass a bakery again, perhaps the same one, perhaps another, closed now, its windows dark, its door locked, its ovens resting. You imagine the warmth that will return here in a few hours, the smell of bread filling the street, the quiet early morning rhythm beginning again. You walk on. You reach a small bridge crossing a narrow canal or service road, the water below reflecting the streetlights in broken, shimmering lines. You stop at the railing. You look down. You watch the reflections shift and move, distorted but steady, like the city's heartbeat translated into light. You rest your hands on the cool metal railing. You breathe. This is your major historical fact for this section. Urban infrastructure in the early 20th century increasingly incorporated canals, service roads, and underground systems to manage growing populations and commerce. Historians still debate whether these developments improved urban efficiency more than they increased complexity. You straighten. You walk on. You notice a man walking toward you, his coat pulled tight, his hat low, his hands in his pockets. He passes you without looking up, his step steady. His pace measured, as if he knows exactly where he is going, or knows exactly that he does not need to. You continue walking. You reach another intersection. This one feels quieter again. Not empty. Just resting. You stop. You look around. You notice how the streetlights cast long, soft shadows across the pavement. You notice how the windows glow faintly, like stars scattered across the sides of buildings. You notice how the air feels cooler now, crisper, clearer, as if the city has washed its face and is ready for sleep. You realize something quietly comforting. You are not lost. You are wandering. There is a difference. You smile, faintly, to yourself. You walk on. You walk into a part of the city where the buildings grow taller again, but the streets grow quieter. This combination feels strange at first, vertical energy paired with horizontal stillness, like someone standing very still while thinking very loudly. You look up. The windows stretch high above you, rows upon rows of light and dark rectangles stacked neatly against the night sky. Some glow warmly. Some are completely dark. Some flicker faintly, as if someone inside is still awake, shifting, reading, thinking, or perhaps just staring at the ceiling, wondering what tomorrow will bring. You walk. You pass a doorway with a brass handle worn smooth by countless hands. You touch it briefly, feeling the cool metal, imagining the many people who have passed through this door, residents, visitors, strangers, friends. This is your major historical fact for this section. Apartment living expanded rapidly in early 20th century cities as populations grew and housing density increased. Historians still debate whether apartment life fostered community or intensified urban anonymity. You continue walking. You hear footsteps behind you. Not close. Not far. Just present. You do not turn. Not because you are afraid. Because you do not need to be. You continue walking. The footsteps fade. You walk on. You pass a laundromat, or something like one, though the word itself may not yet be common, a place where clothes are washed, dried, pressed, folded, prepared for lives that will be lived in them tomorrow. The windows are dark now, but you imagine the space earlier, the hum of machines, the smell of soap, the rhythm of daily maintenance. This brings us to an obscure cultural tidbit. Early commercial laundries and wash houses offered communal services before home washing machines became widespread. Historians still debate whether these spaces eased domestic labor more than they altered household rhythms. You walk on. You reach a quiet residential street. No shops. No businesses. Just buildings. Homes. Lives. You walk slowly now. Not because you are tired. Because you are listening. You hear the faint sound of a piano from somewhere inside one of the buildings, a slow melody, uncertain, gentle, as if someone is practicing not for performance, but for themselves. You pause. You listen. The melody drifts through the open window, rises briefly into the night air, then fades, leaving the street exactly as it was, but softer, warmer, more human. This is your major historical fact for this section. Pianos were common household instruments in the early 20th century, serving as central sources of home entertainment. Historians still debate whether domestic music making declined primarily due to radio or changing social patterns. You walk on. You reach a corner. You stop. You lean lightly against a building. You close your eyes for a moment. Not to sleep. Just to rest. You feel the wall behind you. You feel the sidewalk beneath your feet. You feel the air around you. You feel yourself breathing. In. Out. Slowly. You open your eyes. You continue walking. You feel something subtle shift. Not in the city. In you. You feel less like a visitor. More like a presence. Not someone passing through. Someone existing. Here. Now. You walk on. And the night continues its quiet, steady companionship beside you. You walk into a stretch of the city where the buildings seem to hold their breath. Not in fear. In stillness. The street narrows slightly, the sidewalk growing just a little tighter beneath your feet, as if the city itself is leaning in to listen to something you cannot quite hear. The streetlights here are spaced farther apart, leaving pockets of shadow between soft pools of light. You move through them slowly, drifting from glow to darkness and back again. You walk. You notice a church. Not grand. Not towering. Just steady. Stone walls. A modest entrance. A small bell tower rising above the roofline like a quiet thought rising above a busy mind. The doors are closed now, but the building feels awake in a different way, not busy, not active, but present. You pause at the steps. You imagine the interior, wooden pews, dim light, the faint scent of wax and old books, the kind of quiet that feels heavier than silence but lighter than sound. This is your major historical fact for this section. Churches remained central community institutions in early 20th century urban life, offering spiritual, social, and charitable support. Historians still debate whether urbanization weakened religious influence or reshaped it. You walk on. You pass a lamppost with a small metal sign attached, a street name, perhaps, or a notice, or something official that no one really reads unless they have to. The sign reflects a little light, just enough to catch your attention, not enough to demand it. You continue walking. You hear a sound, a faint shuffle, a soft scuff, the subtle rhythm of someone else's steps. You glance to the side and see a man walking his dog. The dog moves slowly, deliberately, nose close to the ground, as if reading a story written entirely in scent. You smile faintly. The man nods. You nod back. No words. No need. This brings us to an obscure cultural tidbit. Dog walking became more common in urban areas during the early 20th century as companion animals increasingly replaced working animals in city life. Historians still debate whether this shift reflected changing social values or economic conditions. You walk on. You pass a small grocery store. Closed now. The window displays are still visible, crates of produce, jars of preserved goods, loaves of bread stacked neatly, labels facing outward like polite introductions. You imagine the shopkeeper earlier, sweeping the floor, counting the register, locking the door, then heading home under these same streetlights. You walk on. You feel the night deepening. Not darkening. Deepening. Like a lake growing stiller the farther you go from shore. You reach another intersection. This one feels older. The pavement uneven. The buildings slightly crooked. The streetlights warmer, their glow softer, their reach shorter. You stop. You look around. You feel the weight of time here, not heavy, not oppressive, just present, like a quiet companion who has been sitting beside you all along. This is your major historical fact for this section. Older neighborhoods in cities often retained pre-industrial layouts, creating contrasts with newer, planned urban developments. Historians still debate whether these areas preserved cultural identity or hindered modernization. You step forward. You walk on. You pass a doorway with a single light above it, illuminating the entrance but nothing else. The door itself is worn, the paint chipped, the handle smooth. You imagine how many times this door has opened and closed, how many lives have passed through it, how many stories have begun or ended here. You continue walking. You hear distant music again, not jazz this time, not lively, not rhythmic, but something slower, quieter, perhaps a hymn, perhaps a lullaby, perhaps just someone playing softly because the night asked them to. You do not try to identify it. You let it be. You walk on. You feel something settle inside you. Not sadness. Not joy. Just calm. Just acceptance. Just presence. You realize, quietly, that the night has not been something you observed. It has been something you have joined. You walk on. And the city walks with you. You step into a part of the city that feels like it belongs to another rhythm. Not faster. Not slower. Just different. The buildings here are taller, their facades more uniform, their windows arranged with almost mathematical precision. The sidewalks are wider. The streetlights brighter. The night here feels less like a blanket and more like a soft, steady hum. You walk. You notice a man standing beneath a streetlight, reading a newspaper, even though the hour suggests he should be asleep. The paper rustles faintly in his hands as he turns the page, the sound blending gently into the background noise of the city. This is your major historical fact for this section. Late-night newspaper editions were common in major cities, providing updated news for evening and overnight readers. Historians still debate whether these editions shaped public opinion more than morning papers. You walk on. You pass a hotel with a grand entrance, its doors framed by tall columns, its lobby glowing warmly through large windows. You glimpse the interior, a polished floor, a long desk, a few chairs, perhaps a chandelier hanging above, its light softened by dust and time. You imagine travelers inside, some arriving late, some leaving early, some staying long enough to forget where they came from. You walk on. You hear the distant sound of a train whistle, long, low, echoing across the city like a call from another world. The sound lingers in the air for a moment, then fades, leaving the night unchanged but slightly more expansive. This brings us to an obscure cultural tidbit. Train whistles were regulated by city ordinances in the early 20th century, though enforcement varied widely. Historians still debate whether these regulations were motivated more by public safety or noise complaints. You continue walking. You reach a wide avenue. Cars pass occasionally, their headlights sweeping across the pavement, briefly illuminating your shadow before carrying it away again. You stand at the corner, watching the lights move, feeling the steady pulse of the city beneath your feet. You step off the curb. You cross the street. You walk on. You pass a cafe. Closed now. The chairs inside are stacked neatly, the tables bare, the counter clean, the air still. You imagine the cafe earlier, the clink of cups, the murmur of conversation, the warmth of coffee, the quiet companionship of shared space. You walk on. You feel the night shifting again. Not ending. Not beginning. Just continuing. You reach another intersection. This one feels quieter again. Not empty. Just resting. You stop. You listen. You hear distant traffic. You hear distant voices. You hear your own breathing. You feel grounded. You feel calm. You feel present. You take a deep breath. In. Out. Slowly. You realize something quietly important. The night has not been something you passed through. It has been something you lived. Moment by moment. Step by step. Breath by breath. And now, gently, without fanfare, you feel yourself ready to move toward whatever comes next, not with urgency, not with resistance, but with acceptance. You take one last look around. The buildings. The lights. The shadows. The quiet. The city. Then you turn. You walk. And the night walks with you. You drift into a part of the city that feels almost unfinished. Not abandoned. Just quietly waiting. The buildings here are lower, their brickwork darker, their windows fewer. The street feels wider, but somehow emptier, like a hallway after everyone has gone to bed. The streetlights stand farther apart, leaving long stretches of shadow that feel less like darkness and more like pauses between thoughts. You walk. Your footsteps echo faintly, not loudly enough to be disruptive, but clearly enough to remind you that you are here, and that the night is listening. You pass a warehouse. Its doors are shut. Its windows are high. Its walls are thick. You imagine the interior, stacks of crates, the faint scent of wood and oil, the memory of movement lingering in still air. Earlier, there would have been men lifting, carrying, shouting softly, their voices bouncing off the walls. Now, there is only the echo of that energy, like the aftertaste of a song. This is your major historical fact for this section. Warehouses played a central role in the distribution networks of 1920s cities, supporting growing consumer economies. Historians still debate whether this growth primarily benefited workers or business owners. You walk on. You notice a small office building with a single light still on in an upper window. You imagine someone inside, perhaps an accountant, a clerk, a night watchman, finishing a task, straightening papers, rubbing tired eyes, preparing to finally leave. You walk on. You feel the night growing quieter. Not empty. Just focused. You hear fewer voices now. Fewer cars. Fewer footsteps. You feel as though the city itself is settling into sleep, layer by layer, neighborhood by neighborhood, like a large animal folding itself into rest. You continue walking. You reach a narrow alley. Not dark. Not threatening. Just narrow. The bricks on either side are worn smooth by time and weather. A faint light spills from somewhere above, illuminating a patch of ground where water has pooled, reflecting the glow like a small, quiet mirror. You pause. You look at your reflection. Not clearly. Just enough to recognize movement. Just enough to see that you are still here. This brings us to an obscure cultural tidbit. Urban alleyways often served as informal workspaces for tradespeople and small vendors in the early 20th century. Historians still debate whether these spaces fostered community or reinforced economic inequality. You walk on. You pass the alley. You return to the street. You feel the night shifting again. Not closing. Not opening. Just deepening. You realize something quietly comforting. There is no destination tonight. There is no arrival point. There is only movement. There is only presence. There is only this steady, unhurried walk through a city that is learning, moment by moment, how to sleep. You continue walking. You hear a clock chime somewhere in the distance. Not loudly. Not sharply. Just clearly enough to mark time without demanding attention. You count the chimes. Not because you need to, but because it feels nice to let time announce itself. You walk on. You feel calm. You feel grounded. You feel gently tired. Not exhausted. Not restless. Just ready. Ready to rest. Ready to pause. ready to stop moving without needing to stop existing. You walk on. And the city walks with you. You arrive at a part of the city that feels like a threshold. Not a doorway. Not an ending. Just a gentle pause between what has been and what will be. The buildings here are smaller again, more familiar, more human in scale. The street feels warmer, softer, quieter, as though it has learned how to breathe slowly. You walk. You pass a row of houses. Their windows are dark. Their doors are closed. Their porches are still. You imagine the interiors, people asleep, blankets pulled up, breaths rising and falling, dreams drifting softly through quiet rooms. You walk on. You pass a park. The gates are closed. The paths inside are barely visible, winding gently through shadow and moonlight. You imagine the trees standing quietly, their branches barely moving, their leaves whispering to one another in a language older than streets and buildings. This is your major historical fact for this section. Urban parks became essential spaces for rest and recreation in rapidly growing cities during the early 20th century. Historians still debate whether their primary purpose was public health or social control. You walk on. You reach a bench. You stop. You sit. You rest your hands on your knees. You breathe. Slowly. In. Out. The city does not stop. But it softens. You hear a distant car. A distant voice. A distant train. But none of it feels close. None of it feels urgent. Everything feels far enough away to be gentle. This brings us to an obscure cultural tidbit. Some early 20th century parks closed at night, while others remained open for quiet reflection and walking. Historians still debate how often these rules were actually enforced. You sit. You breathe. You feel something settle inside you, not an emotion, not a thought, not a conclusion, just a sense of completion, like a book closing softly, not with a snap, but with a sigh. You think back to the street you walked past earlier. You think back to the music. The lights. The shadows. The faces. The footsteps. The windows. The doors. The quiet. You realize something. The night has not been about spectacle. It has not been about drama. It has not been about history in the way textbooks tell it. It has been about the small. The ordinary. The overlooked. The gentle rhythm of people living their lives, going to bed, waking up, walking home, standing under streetlights, reading newspapers, walking dogs, sweeping floors, locking doors, turning off lights. And somehow, without effort, without announcement, without instruction, you have become part of that rhythm. Not as a visitor. Not as a tourist. But as a presence. A quiet walker. A listener. A witness. A participant. You sit. You breathe. You feel your shoulders soften. Your jaw loosen. Your thoughts slow. Your attention drift. You allow yourself to rest here. Not because the night demands it. But because you deserve it. Now, gently, slowly, without rushing, you begin to let go of the city. Not all at once. Not abruptly. But in layers. You let go of the buildings. You let go of the streets. You let go of the lights. You let go of the sounds. You let go of the movement. You let go of the walk. And what remains is something quieter. Softer. Still. You breathe. In. Out. Longer this time. You imagine the city continuing on without you, streetlights glowing, windows dark, footsteps echoing, trains moving, clocks chiming, but you no longer need to follow it. You have walked enough. You have listened enough. You have been present enough. Now you rest. Now you drift. Now you soften. Now you sleep. And the city, kind and patient, continues to breathe around you, carrying on gently, quietly, endlessly, while you float away into calm, into rest, into stillness, into sleep. Good night.